Lauren, welcome to the Way Champions podcast. It's an honor to have you on. It's an honor to have a fellow Bendite on as well.
Bendite.
And
Wow.
it's
That's
it's
right.
just it's just great. And congratulations on the new book, Good for a Girl. It was extraordinary.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, usually I kick these things off, but Jerry absolutely insisted that he gets to ask the first question
Okay.
this week. So we're going to let Jerry take over from here.
I'm not a Bendite, but I'm in Santa Cruz, and I know you've run the mountains here, so you know what my backyard is like, right?
I'm dying to go down there and do a running and mountain bike trip.
Oh,
It's been years
pe
since I've been to Santa Cruz.
yeah, people come from all over the world,
Hmm.
on really at least all over the country to mountain bike right in my backyard. I'm a half mile from the trailhead, so it's really.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. Someone's got to live here, so I
You
chose to
know,
do it.
if you want
Yeah.
to house swap sometime and go visit John, like
Not a bad idea. Then I can bug John for a while. I need to be
exactly.
up there. But anyway, John said uh, to our listeners out there, this is not a good book. It- it's an extraordinary book.
Oh,
It really
thanks,
is.
Jerry.
Is this your first attempt to write a book?
Yes.
Your writing is amazing. After 17 of my own books, I can pick up a good writer. You have much potential in this field of writing. But anyway, more importantly, gosh, I go through the book and I come up all these passages and they're inspiring and they're also very quizzical. I just don't know sometimes what they mean, but you were very connected to your dad. And
Yes.
I know he's passed and what have you, but you know, it's like your dad, Frank, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I start and end the book with Frank.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's something else that we'll get to in a minute, but in a few minutes. But he loved and protected you throughout all those years. And he once told you, and I quote, so this is not my language, this is his, Lauren, don't take shit from no one. Right? You
Yep,
remember that, right?
I
And
do.
after he told you this, I guess it was as I recall, the neighborhood boys were giving you a hard time outside. They had some events going on and blah 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 blah. And so you go outside and you say in the book, I went outside and I kicked them in the balls and they let me play.
Yeah, I mean, they basically were, that was the first time I was kind of being excluded from like a neighborhood sport activity for being a girl. Because growing up in a
Yeah,
neighborhood full of mostly
yeah,
boys, but a
yeah,
fair number of
yeah.
girls. Yeah, we just all
But
played together, and then all of a sudden it started to be like, oh no, you go to your separate corner.
yeah, that just says volumes about how you navigate those who said no to you along your way on that journey. I mean, really, it speak a little bit more to that, will you please?
Well, I kick in the metaphorical balls now. I don't
Mhm.
kick in the regular
Yeah.
balls anymore. But no, my dad was definitely like he grew up in New Orleans. He was like wrong side of the track kind of kid and single mom, six kids. He's a twin, the youngest. He just grew up like pretty hard knocks and you take care of your own problems and sometimes you take care of your problems with violence and it's not my way of teaching my kids how to do things, but he knew the power of a swift kick in the nuts and sometimes in his mind you can try to reason with people but at a certain point you just need to establish that you belong there and do whatever it takes. So I appreciated that he didn't tell me to like, oh well, maybe you should just go play with the girls if they're going to be jerks and not let you play, you should just give up. And he was like, no, go put yourself in there. And
Yeah.
there probably was another way I could have done it that got the same
Yeah.
result, but I
Hmm.
it left an impact on me of just like, yeah, don't take no for an answer. And if you really feel justified that you belong in a space, like
Yeah.
you gotta advocate for yourself.
And we see
Mm.
that throughout the entire book. It sort of sets a tone for the entire book, but this is you as a person. This is who you are.
Yeah, and that's a lot in large part because of Frank.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Your
John.
relationship with your dad is just it reminds me, I think of as I was reading this book, and I echo Jerry. I read it in one sitting. Actually, I picked it up in the morning. I was flying to Maine to work with two women's college teams and some team development work, and I finished it that night that I arrived in Maine in the hotel. And I got up and I met with these teams. It was at Colby College the next day. And I brought this book and I said, every one of you needs to read this book. Just that's extra credit with me. But it's such a good book. And I was thinking throughout, as someone who I have a teenage daughter who I think as the oldest and as a daughter wants to please dad, wants to make dad happy. I think as the oldest child, I was really motivated by that as well.
Mhm.
And I think that there's this balance of like you run for, you play for, you work for to make
Mhm.
dad proud or parents proud, which can be a really healthy thing that drives you to excellence. And it can also be an unhealthy thing. And you sort of work that balance throughout your whole life. And you had this quote that said, like, I had this childish idea that my success could save my dad as well. And that's a pretty
Mhm.
powerful burden to carry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That, I mean, I think you touch on, like, there are real positives to that, wanting to please your parents or wanting to please your coach. Like, that's not all bad in any way. Like, I loved running for my coach. I mean, I adored Coach DeLong in high school. And the main thing that he always just said was make sure you're also running for yourself, because you can end up outsourcing it all to please other people. And then you lose track with your own feelings and desires. And you can end up way down a road long after you should have left that road, because you're doing things for other people. And that's true of running or life or any career, you know. So, but with girls in particular, like, this can happen to anyone of any gender, but with girls, we're socialized to be pleasers in all aspects of our life. So while you may, as a male, be have certain safe arenas where pleasing someone like a parent or a coach is like the exception to the rest of life, which I think is more empowering on average for males. But our culture still does try to keep women like a little bit more compliant, a little bit more, smiling and self-sacrifice, taking a back seat. Like, what does support look like? Being a supportive partner looks different, right? Still. So um, I had to, in the book, I liked playing with that. I liked playing with like the parts of it that were healthy with my dad and the parts of it that were unhealthy. And because of his alcoholism and the Jekyll and Hyde personality that came with that disease, that's where it tilted into the unhealthy for me, is that I could see that he was happiest when his children were thriving.
Mm.
And so then I added this element of like, to keep my dad from feeling like he needs to drink, I just need to keep thriving. And I need to make sure I let him know that I'm thriving and that I'm a reflection of him, which means that he has everything inside him that we have in us. And I felt like I needed to boost my dad's self-esteem, because he never had the same opportunities that we had, just by nature of like his childhood, the
Mm-hmm.
way he grew up.
Yeah. And the whole everything that you talk about there, and I think we'll get into that a bit more in a bit, just the way young girls are culturalized in this country and the way that we have developed the sports system based on valuing the things that we tell young boys to value but not young girls to value. I mean, that's what's fascinating about this book. When I picked it up, I thought I was going to read a running book, and
Hmm.
I read a book that has spoken to me about being a dad, about being a coach of girls, teenagers, women, um, and working with a lot of these teams now and working with coaches to understand that this difference of one's not right and one's not wrong, but they are different, and you
Hmm.
have to know and understand who's in front of you if you're ever going to get the best out of them. And that's why
Yeah.
I found this book just extraordinary.
I think one of the big things that the book tries to smack people in the face with is that we've been taught that equality, especially gender equality, is giving the women what the men have the way they have it, right? It's like, hey, you guys have things we don't have. We want those too. Treat us the same. Equality means treat us the same. And to, in some arenas, that works. But when it comes to when you're dealing with two different animals, really, like when there are sex-based differences or puberty differences, or like that that should have different environments to support them from each other. But we're giving everyone the same thing. We're giving everyone the thing designed around the male body. Then you're actually making it worse. Like, you're making it harder to thrive, which you may give someone an equal chance to play, but you're making it harder for them to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, and then I'll let Jerry jump back in here, because there's, you know, one of the big takeaways for me was this idea that when boys hit puberty, they tend to go on this upward trajectory, and they have blips and bumps, but testosterone hits and they get bigger, stronger, and they really change. And so there's almost always an increase in performance. Whereas with girls, oftentimes there's a plateau in performance, especially in something like running or gymnastics or things like that. And yet we often look at that plateau as, you don't care, you stop getting better, let's have someone take your place, instead of understanding it's just a plateau. And if we're patient and we keep teaching and coaching, then they're going to go back on this upward trajectory. And you talk about your
Yes.
own experience of like sort of being grateful that, hey, I was kind of a late developer, which saved my running career.
It meant that it gave me, as a writer, you get to see me watching it happen all around me. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
member of this group of girls, but I'm on a late blooming timeline, so I'm watching it and watching it, and this feeling of like dread starts to build up in me, of how, when eventually I get puberty, what will it happen? Will I get to keep doing this thing I love at this high level, or will it be taken away? Because we are still looking at puberty. It's a moment in time. It's a temporary plateau or dip, but we're looking at it as if it is an indication of someone's long-term potential. And then we pathologize it. We pathologize the ways that the athlete changes, and like you were saying, oh, we treat them like maybe they're not motivated, maybe it's anxiety, maybe they just don't care as much as they used to. We send them to a sports psychologist, and we have them barking up the wrong tree. Like, if you take a girl who's, there's nothing wrong with her, but you have her start looking between her ears and working with professionals, acting like something's wrong with her, um, that can cause a lot of damage. It's just like,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I like to use this analogy of, the equivalent for boys would be if you took 13-year-old boys and you tested their singing voice to make a determination on what their vocal potential is over the course of their lifetime, like boys that like to sing. And it would just be the stupidest time of life to do a test with any sort of long-term conclusion. And I mean, you're laughing because it's ridiculous. We would never do that.
I'm
We
laughing because I have a
understand that that's a,
15-year-old son.
okay, well, there you go. Yeah, so we know that that's a temporary stage, and we treat
Who
it as
doesn't
such.
sing?
And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's such a great point. Jerry, jump in there.
Well, I want to shift gears here because I'm aware of the time and we have so much to talk about. But I want to go to the end of the book
Great.
because when I read that last page, I need to know whether I was interpreting something correctly or if I was just using some crazy thoughts patterns that I usually have. And at the end of the book, you talk about the situation about the love for your dad and what have you. But the very last paragraph, you're talking about you're on the track, you're near home, and you're
Hmm.
on the track, and you're lying down, and you're just taking all the energy in, and the sunlight, and your connection to the track was really deep, and you stand up, literally stand up,
Hmm.
and you run home.
Hmm.
When I saw that statement, I stood up and I ran home. Oh my God, that was filled with all kinds of metaphorical language. Am I reading into that? You stood up. You stood up to so many people in your life. I saw this as a declaration of your liberation, or a
Yes.
declaration of independence.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was a moment of taking all of that, all of the track, all of my running, all of my pursuit of drive, and reclaiming it for myself. With my dad now gone, and me realizing just how much, like, even as I was growing up, there was still these kind of claws of doing things for other people still in there. And his death, and the feelings that brought up in that scene, was like the final realization that I need to be free of all of that, and I need to kind of suck all that up from the track,
yeah,
and it's mine.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
the running home was literal, but also figuratively, like bringing myself back home. In the beginning, I talk about how running will always be a home for my body and mind, and
yeah, yeah.
so
And
You
kind of
home,
also,
the
home, home. Really, what I came away with. I mean, it was very touching for me to read that. A lot of emotion in there, and it was like coming home to your heart, who you are, your sense of
Mhm.
who Lauren really is and what you're all about. And I don't know if you intended that, but what a brilliant way to end a book, because it's
Thank
not
you.
the ending, it's the beginning,
It is, yeah.
you
In a
know?
way, it's like the making of my adult self, or which is an advocate, which is like, when am I my own?
Yeah.
And that was the moment I became my own.
Hmm.
Um, and nothing was really ever the same. And then the book is sort of what that's when you realize you're reading the manifestation of what started in that moment on
Hmm.
the track. You're like, I'm
Hmm.
holding the result of what
Hmm.
happened when she did that, and then went on to do something about it.
Hmm.
And
Beautiful.
and
Yeah.
your career, I mean, it's just, so many ups and downs, the highest highs and the lowest lows. I mean, as they say, like being the, you know, fourth place in the Olympics, or what, third place in the Olympic trials, and you don't get to go, or like these things where you were so close and got injured,
Hmm.
so close, and dealing with these disappointments and identity and all these moments is just, it's just this fascinating story, and sort of this battle between your love of running and the fear of falling short, and those two themes kind of run throughout your life, run throughout your book.
Yeah, I think that the idea of sport was originally my own, and I found running. It like lit me up. It gave me community. It gave me movement. It gave me exploration and adventure, and something to try to master. Um, and then the sports systems teach you what to value, teach you what's important, teach you what's rewarded, and you begin to kind of hone in on those things because that's what is societally rewarded. And that can be at the expense of the things that drew you to it or filled you up the most in the first place. And so the story, I make the reader run in my shoes
Hmm.
through all those things so they can feel what happens when we put too much emphasis on the Olympics. We can
Hmm.
actually see, when you're just watching the Olympics on TV and you see people getting their medal, and you can get caught up in the way they present it all, that it's like a huge failure to come up short and get silver. Oh, how devastating.
Hmm.
And but then you move on with your life. But then once you've kind of lived it with someone else, you can see what is the day-to-day impact of that cultural messaging, that all that
Hmm.
matters is the
Hmm.
Olympics. And
Hmm.
then an Olympian body should look like this. And that,
Hmm.
how does that impact every day of that person's life, their self-esteem, the choices they make, the doors they close in order to keep that one open.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, Jerry, let me just say, because
Sure.
we're going to talk about that, like, this idea that a medal is worth any price, and our culture celebrates that, and TV celebrates it, and NBC Sports celebrates
Hmm.
that, and then we love to, build people up and watch a Michaela Schifrin crash, or Simone Biles or whatever,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, look what that whole attitude led to: the Curlies or Larry Nasser, and most every
Yeah.
sport has, and obviously the Oregon Project and things that have happened in running, and just these horrible things that happen to athletes. And these are the people at the top, never mind the tens, dozens, hundreds, thousands that got discarded along the way. I mean, that's what's
Yeah.
so very sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That emphasis, what we decide to value as a culture, allows like a fertile environment for abusers to thrive under the guise of performance. And we don't pay very close attention because our eyes are on the winning, our eyes are on those things, and we end up missing the signs. And I talk about in the book, I talk about compliance, how compliance is what defines coachability, especially for female athletes, but for
Mhm.
athletes in general. It's compliance. Do what you're told, and don't listen to your body, really. Like, the coach decides when you're injured, the coach decides when you play, the coach decides when you don't play. And obviously you need some of that. Someone's got to be in charge. But if
Mhm.
you're completely disempowering people, they shut off their signals. They stop trusting themselves, and then they have to relearn the language of their body, the language of their knowing as adults. And I think that's one of the long-term harms that happens, not just to elite athletes, but to athletes coming through the sports system at all kinds of levels.
And their parents. right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and the parents of the young figure skater or the young gymnast who turn their
Mhm.
back on abusive behavior because they're afraid if they speak up, their kid's going to be pushed out of the system, which is a
Yep.
reality. And we've seen that
Mhm.
through films like Athlete A and things like that.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
and yet, you know, we basically are condoning child abuse in many cases, and obviously sexual abuse, because of a
Yep.
fear of so much power in the hands of a coach.
Yep.
Yeah. Jerry, go ahead.
So there's so much more to sports, is what I'm hearing, than gold.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
the
Olympic
expression,
creed.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to Pierre de Coubertin and what he thought about the Olympics and how far we've gotten off track. There's an expression out there that says you don't win silver, you lose gold.
Mhm.
That's the priority. You not only get to the Olympics, but if you don't win, okay. So who was the silver medalist in the 1500 in the last Olympiad? I mean, other than you and I, the three of us, no one else knows.
No, I
But
don't
the
know.
Yeah.
gold medal,
There's just two of you.
right? Yeah. But
Yeah.
but anyway, so with our work, the work that John and I do, and over the years, we kind of see sport as a microcosmic classroom for learning about life. So if we're talking about winning, the real victory is, do you get to know who you are? And you obviously did when you stood up on that track and you ran home. You found out who you were, and you found out a lot. Joseph Campbell, does that name ring a bell with you at all?
Yeah. I'm not sure why,
Right?
but it
Well,
does.
he wrote many things. Brilliant, author, writer, uh, teacher. He once he was a 800-meter runner in the 1920s at Columbia
Mhm.
University, and he was 1/10 of a second. Now they didn't have that sophisticated timers during those days, so they had a
Yeah.
stopwatch. He was 1/10 of a second off the world record in the 800.
Wow.
Yeah, right. And in his book, The Hero's Journey, which is something I really highly recommend you take a look at. But in that book, he says, those days, those days when I was competing and I was running on the track were the most glorious days of my life. This is a guy who's achieved so much in his life. And he said, looking back on those days, I learned everything I know about myself today. Everything that I needed to know, I learned on the track. How do you respond to something like that? I see you nodding yes. Am I setting you up for
Yeah.
something here or what?
Well, I mean, that's why keeping girls in sport is so important. When you're losing twice as many girls as boys, when 50% of girls drop out by age 17, they're missing out on that. It's the journey of sport. And when we say like like we've been told it's all about winning, it's not. It's about the journey, and it sounds so cheesy, it sounds so cliche, but it is true. You go on this journey of pushing yourself to find out what you're capable of riding on the edge, of looking inside and finding out, like with the mirror, the internal mirror, where are my weaknesses? Where are the places that I've just like could show up better, stronger to towards this end of finding out what my capacity is, what I'm capable of. And then you also get, because of the like high stakes of competing, you get to face all these dragons that are inside you. You get the opportunity to face them and slay them, which then you know them. Then you know all the parts of yourself that you can apply to work, to relationships, love, community. And you get to fast track it as an athlete when you get committed to the craft of sport.
How do you, I mean, I think one of the biggest problems in sport is we treat, for kids sport, girls, boys, both, I think, that the be all and end all is how good you are by your when you're 12, 14, 16.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you and I live in this place where there's lots of, very athletic driven parents who do that. And I just think, especially with something like running, right? Jerry's 80 and he still runs a couple days a week. Like, this slice of your teenage years is just a tiny, tiny piece of your running life or your
yes.
tennis life or your soccer playing life. And yet we treat it like it's the be all end all. What if we just treated it as that little microcosm of a very long journey and stop putting it like, if you haven't made it by 16, you failed.
That's how it should be. It should
Yeah.
be like if it was a college course, it would be intro to sports, because it is
Yeah,
the
exactly.
beginning of a lifelong journey with movement. And we
Mm.
know from a public health standpoint that people need to move their bodies. They
Mhm.
need to move their bodies for a lifetime for optimal health. And so in high school, in education system, like so many of these sports programs are through our education system, like that's what it needs to be about. But even youth sports, there's a great book, I don't know if you've read it, Take Back the Game by Linda
Yeah, yeah,
Flanagan.
Linda, yeah, she's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, she highlights a lot of the stuff that you're talking about with the professionalization and all the money that's gone into youth sports. And I think, like, I just want my kids to think of movement as something that's associated with enjoyment, community, exploration, that they feel, I want them to feel like something's missing if a week goes by and they haven't been moving their body. It should feel like something's missing. And so if my kids don't make the travel squad on their soccer team because we didn't treat it like professional sport at age 12, like I frankly do not care. And there, I know that that's partly because I live in a city where you can do sports recreationally for a lifetime, and we have easy access to many things that, like, there are places you can live, many in cities in America, or if you don't make the soccer team at age 12, like, what are your other things you're going to do
Right.
if you're cut early? So I guess you can do cross country and track. We
Yeah.
need more sports where there's no cuts, and that way
Yeah.
you at least have a chance to play.
Yeah, totally. Well, I met a track coach or a cross country coach, and he described his program as, we want our program to be a place where we have one of the first runners cross the line every time because we're a place for high performers, and we have one of the last runners cross the line every time because we're a place for everyone. And I always thought that was a great
Yeah,
description. I
that's
wish there
really
was
nice.
more programs like that. I interrupted you, Jerry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the other day we were talking to the president and CEO of NYCA, which is a national interscholastic mountain biking organization. And the beauty of these organizations that are going around now are really taking the emphasis off of winning and beating and annihilating others and everything else. And what it is everyone can show up. You don't have to make the team. No one gets cut. You're having fun. What a concept.
Yeah.
OMG, right? Having fun. And you had a lot of fun, but there were times when it was not fun at all.
Yes.
And so we go down this path, and I just get so turned off to see parents pushing their kids, thinking that this is going to really work for them when they're just living vicariously through the kids' behaviors and
Yeah.
accomplishments and everything else. It's just sad, And I'm so, that's why this book to me is so exciting for people to read, because it's not about running. You're using running, correct me if I'm wrong here. You're
Yeah.
using running as a vehicle.
Hmm.
It happens to be running. It could have been it could have been fly fishing. It could have been
Yeah.
anything, right? And so you're
Yep.
using this book. It's wrong if people look at this book and they say, "Oh, here's a running book," right? And no, it's
Hmm.
not. It's a book about life, and it's a book about getting on board with your own personal greatness, and that's what we should be talking about with our kids. And go
Yeah.
ahead, Lauren. Yeah.
Well, you just sort of made me think about, like, one of the first um, stories, like, around a sport, if you can call horse racing a sport, which I think it is. The horses are the
Mhm.
athletes and the jockeys are athletes too, but it's not one of the traditional ones we think about. Was when I saw Seabiscuit, and I
Mhm.
was like, I don't give two craps about horse racing, but this is not a movie about horse racing.
Mhm.
And I always thought, like, if I were going to write a book about running, I wanted to do it like that. That it wasn't. It was a guise, but it was a way to learn all these other things,
Mhm.
and to get in touch with the human emotion that is in the groundwaters of it, that it extends beyond the sport of running.
Mm. Well, I think your book is a really, I'm always fascinated by books that people like to go to a party on the weekend and talk about a topic, and they really have no idea what they're talking about. And and
Yeah.
and your book is one of those that fills a gap. And so I think, like, let's explore a little bit of that. We just kind of touched on it, but let's really dive into what are some of the main differences between boys and girls, men and women, that people should be aware of. We have listeners who have sons and daughters. We have listeners who are coaches of both males and females. And I think these differences are very important based upon the fact that most, if not all, of the research in most areas is also done on male athletes. And so what we, what we say is, this is what it's supposed to be, but that's research on males.
Yeah, same thing. Science has been under the impression that um, that we're all the same, or we are obviously more the same than we are different,
Right.
but that any research using male bodies could be applied to female bodies, and the assumption is that it's the same, that there won't be a difference. Meanwhile, what's hilarious, I'm a human biology major at Stanford, is that when it was explained to me in exercise physiology why female athletes aren't included in a lot of this research, they were saying, well, because of the menstrual cycle, there's this variable that's really hard to control for. And in experiments, it's really important to control as many variables as you can. And so if you end up bringing females into the research, then they're at different parts, ovulation or the follicular or whatever stages. And I'm like, okay, so you just said that the research on men can be applied to women, but then you said that we're so different, we can't even be used in the study. So which is it? Like, to me, it sounds like we actually should be comprising all of the studies that are used on female athletes for the knowledge about female athletes. But I think it's just harder. It's harder to do it once you get women in the mix. But I think what your question was like, what are the differences? And I think that in the book, I try to start from the body. And so I kind of do 3 rings expanding out. So there's the body itself, what's the biology and the physiology of the female body as it differs from the male body. And then the next ring out is team. So there's these forces of what a team culture could be, which you could replace sports team with office culture, or your familial system, or your religion, right? So it's this next ring out of influences on what would make your experience in a female body different from a male body. And then there's the bigger ring, which is our culture, like marketing forces, economic forces, patriarchy, misogyny, like these broader things that are pressing in as well. And of course, males have their own thing. Someone else can write that book. So it's not like I'm saying men don't have their stuff. I'm just saying I'm focused on the ones that involve women. And so I start puberty is the first one that I really dive into in detail. That is like once female bodies hit puberty, we have different hormones determining different areas that grow in different ways. And most of them aren't immediately beneficial to sports performance. In the long term, they are, but in the short term, they're not. And then it goes outward from there. So I don't know which one you want to get into, but I think
get into whatever one you find most interesting here. Like, I found them all very interesting and thought provoking as a coach, as a dad, as the way I view the world.
I think that one that I find really interesting is just the idea of the male gaze. So I have a daughter and a son, and my daughter, I was very determined, as you can imagine from reading my book, to not put a bunch of the gender stuff on her, to not have her be obsessed with how she looks or feel like her value is in her appearance, whatever. I didn't use language that would encourage that, and told all my family members not to. But as soon as I take my daughter in public, it doesn't matter what I do in my home, because people are like, your dress is so pretty. Oh, your hair is so beautiful. Your sparkly necklace is so cute. Nobody says that stuff to my son. No one comments on his jeans. No one comments on his hair, very rarely. But she can't leave the house without it. And so girls learn from a very young age to see themselves through 2 perspectives, how they see themselves on the inside and how others are viewing them. And they're always walking around with both in mind. And that has to impact the decisions you make, the things you decide to do or not do, the risks you decide to take or not take. And I wanted people to understand that. So I think trying to bring that to life in the book, like puberty is the first time when we have breasts, are the first part of female puberty that happens. And about 18 months later is the menstrual cycle. So breasts are the first thing that makes you distinctly visibly feminine, whether you feel feminine on the inside or not, and you're viewed sexually, whether you want to be or not. And so you are experiencing, like when you play sports with breasts for the first time in your life, you're experiencing movement in your own body feels different, like just biomechanics and physics. It feels different than it used to. So you have to get used to that. Something like sit-ups is harder. It's just harder. You have a weight vest on. The dynamics are different. Then you also have to think about how your body looks while you're doing it. Is my shirt too tight on my breasts? How do I compare to to my classmates here.
Oh boy.
And then there's how are other people looking at you, and how do you feel being looked at? So especially by men in a heteronormative culture, like how do boys see me, and how does me doing sit-ups with breasts in this outfit view how I'm looked at by them, and or by those in power, or by those, you know, who have influence. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's just really tricky, and that starts from the second your body changes.
And that happens at the same time, right? Let's call it middle school as an age
Yep.
range where you're more conscious about how people view you. And then we add in, ooh, sports matters. You got to win this championship. You got to take this more seriously. You got to compete harder. You have to make this team. Don't get cut. We layer in all these things at this age, and then we wonder why so many girls in that moment quit. And this culturalize of, you know, be nice, um, don't stand out. And then you're saying to someone, be a standout performer, show yourself above everyone else, which goes against everything they've been told their whole lives to do.
Yeah, it's very confusing. It's no wonder. And
Confusing.
then you professionalize youth sports, and it used to cost something like $25 to participate in like a Parks and Rec sport. And we've
Hmm.
gutted, as a country, we've gutted our most recreational accessible sport options, and these private entities are running most of sports, and they're more expensive. So you have class issues, socioeconomic issues that are also doing that.
Hmm. For sure. Ooh, it's a crazy thing. Jerry, stop me if you need to jump in here. Because I know you wanted to kind of ask a question about just high performance in females and the female triad and everything as well, Jerry. So
Oh, I'm going with the flow here. This conversation is very dynamic, and it goes in many directions, and it brings up so much for me personally. I mean, you know, I have one girl, but I have three boys, so we're heavily loaded here in this house with my wife Jan. She's very strong, thank God, to put up with that male energy. But no, you know, what comes to my mind real clearly, Lauren, when you talked about at home, it's one thing. You can talk to your daughter in a way that you know it's spot on, and then you go out into the world, and who's out in the world but other parents and their ideas, and they're not going to be. You're an anomaly. Let's face it. All right,
Yep.
we're all different. We're all anomalies. We're a low percentage of the people out there in the world, and so many parents out there are pushing their kids, and the reason they're pushing their kids is because they're going to feel successful as parents. If my kids achieve, I must be a good parent. If
Yeah.
my kid has courage or tenacity or something like that, yeah, that's kind of cool, but they didn't win anything, you know? So
Yeah.
with that as a backdrop, and you as a young parent, and John, both of you are young parents. My kids are like between 31 and 38, all right? So I'm not a young parent, so to speak, but uh, I'm wondering what should parents know from this conversation here, other than to buy a book and read more of this stuff? But what should they really be doing, or how do you become an
Oh,
ideal sports mom and dad? And what are the kind of message? How do you do this? You know?
well, I obviously don't know the ideal, but one thing what came to mind when you were talking about getting feeling like proud of our kids' accomplishments and our identity as parents, it becomes a reflection of what our kids are and are not accomplishing, right? So we take it personally, and I think that hasn't always been the case for every generation, but very much
Mm.
right now that is at a peak, I think. And so I think that parents need to get a sport. I think you need to get out there and get a sport, because you need to direct your competitive energy somewhere else. And I think be humbled, like be humbled by like all the challenges of showing up every day for something. And also just like I mean, I think it's just natural to be competitive. So you need an avenue that's healthy and that isn't your kids. And they deserve to have that. Should be their thing. It should be their thing, that they can quit or not quit, like try hard or not try hard. Um, it's very egotistical for us to think that like it's about us, really.
You know, here's the thing. I heard you use that word competitive, and I have to make this perfectly clear. there are people out there listening to us that are saying competitiveness. There are people who really believe to be competitive is wrong. You shouldn't be
Mhm.
competitive, you know?
Mhm.
In fact, at the end of the season on the soccer team, everyone gets a trophy, no matter
Mhm.
whether you're 0-10 or 10-0. It doesn't matter. But I think competition is a healthy thing. Our whole society, our whole economy, everything thrives on competition. John and I are in competition all the time. We're writing a book together right now. And let me explain competition. Competition comes from the Latin root compatire, which means to seek together.
Mm.
What a difference when you go about seeking together to teach your kids as a parent. You know what? How could Johnny or Susie help you be a better athlete or a better person? So when John and I are doing this book together, he's getting back to me and he's saying, Jerry, how about doing this? Well, he's challenging me to up my game in writing. And the same token, I go back to John. I say, we might want to think about doing this. This might be a good idea. So I'm challenging his ability to be flexible and open and creative. And so this idea of seeking together, let's not throw away competition and make and put a sugar coat on it and say, yeah, competition, but we don't want to hurt each other. You're going to get hurt in competition. If you're going to play
Yeah.
lacrosse, you're going to get batted in the head as a woman. You don't wear a helmet, you're going to get a big lump on your forehead, right? That's part of it. But what are we learning? I just lost the game today. Why am I a better athlete because of the loss? How
Yeah.
can I help my teammates be better than they are? How can I help my opponent to be at the top of their game? Well, the way I can do that is I need to work harder so I can get
Yeah.
better, so my opponents can get better. So I think we're off track. That's Pierre de Coubertin in the Olympics. That was his idea of competing together, seeking together something greater
Yeah,
than
you're
any,
seeking excellence, potential.
right?
You can't do that
Exactly.
alone. You need other people also seeking
Mm-hmm.
excellence and their
Mm-hmm.
potential in order to get the
Mm-hmm.
best out of you.
Yeah.
And I think that that is one of the beautiful things about it. I think that one of the kind of competition that's unhealthy is the one that involves like I'm better than you as a person because I was better than you at lacrosse, or I'm better than, I when you think about you drew the comparison to our society runs on competition, capitalism runs on competition, right? There's a lot of good things that can come from that, but there's also massive exploitation, the kind of thing of like whatever it takes to make this company succeed, including child labor or paying people well below a living wage, just so I can make sure my company can compete with this company. So when you forget that you're dealing with humans, when you lose dignity and respect for everyone involved, that's when competition brings out the worst in us. So
Yeah,
it's like the kind of competition you're talking about is actually collaboration.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
Cooperation, collaboration, compassion,
Yep. And wanting to
compassion,
win. It's
yes,
just that thing and wanting to
self-compassion.
win.
This is the microcosmic classroom I was referring to before. And I'm so glad that you can support that. And I think parents, coaches out there need to hear this. This is an important point. And you can compete and be the best you can. But if I'm going to run with you up a mountain, you bet that I'm going to get prepared, that I'm going to make you feel pain up going up
hmm
that hill. So that why? Because you'll go back to the drawing board and you'll find out a way to not feel that pain. And then we'll both hug each other and we'll say, you know what? We did it together. Right.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's
I
a
like a mix.
it's
Like
a
I like to
partnership.
have it is. There's times when I want to be pushing myself and there's times that I don't. And there's times that I want to value rest and
Mm-hmm,
restoration and all that. So
mm-hmm,
it's
mm-hmm.
really like just having the whole spectrum.
A
I think with
balance.
when it comes to the issues of women in sport in particular, this idea of competitiveness is at odds with health, so we should get rid of competition. That has been that's what the tricky nature of me writing this book is that I'm pointing out all the ways female athletes are being harmed, which could be used as fuel for those in the category that say, "See, I knew it. Women's sports was unhealthy for women. We put too much emphasis on competition. We shouldn't be emphasizing it at all. It shouldn't even
Ah,
be part of sports." So it's not that, but you like
yeah,
just because,
thanks for
yeah.
making that clear. That's really an important message that people need to get.
mm,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm.
And what are the
yeah,
stakes though? Like what I love about sports like WNBA and women's soccer is they have a union, they have league minimums. Like you're going to get paid a certain amount and it's above the poverty line if you're showing up and you're doing your job your best every day. Sports like track and field, swimming, these individual sports that don't have league minimums, it's like it's feast or famine. I mean, it
Mhm.
is like the stakes are so high related to the
Yeah.
competition
Yeah.
that is where that's where
Yeah.
people start acting desperate, making decisions that compromise their health, making
Hmm.
decisions like the scene in my book where I'm like elbowing my competitor, like not really racing with integrity, which is that's a disqualifiable offense. It can bring out the worst in us when the stakes are unreasonably high.
Hmm.
So you go, you have this amazing career, and all this stuff comes together, and then you sort of retire as a professional runner, and you decide to build your own team, and now
Yeah.
you're going to coach a team, um, and you put together what I think is amazing about this is you put together a group and a running team, but you said, what's all the good I can bring to this, right? Like I know Jay DeSherry, and like, okay, there's a running form, and we'll bring in a doctor to monitor overall health. What did you like? What really motivated you and said, if I'm going to build a team, I'm going to do it right? What does right look like for you?
Yeah, I think just like making sure that com like excellence and health were hand in hand at every step of the way.
Hmm.
And of course, you're still going to get hurt, right? Like
Hmm.
you're still going to get hurt. Like that's just one of the things that happens in life, and you can't avoid all injury. And I'm not naive, but I can I very distinctly say that we will not tolerate disordered eating. I'm not going to look the other way when you have menstrual dysfunction just because you might perform better this season for a few months before you fracture your femur after
Hmm.
that. Like I'm not, those are the kinds of things that people are doing in other programs. And they're just looking the other way, either on purpose or because they're just ignorant to the needs of the female bodied athlete. But I wasn't ignorant to it. I studied
Hmm.
stuff in college. I had the experiences as an athlete. I did a lot of research, and I think that the most powerful thing though that I tried to do that I could tell you of after the 8 years has paid off the most was agency, making sure that I dismantled this idea that coachability means compliance, and that these athletes all came to me, pretty much every single one, having their connection with their inner intuition damaged by previous environments, coaching environments. Um, and that is to be the best in the world, you need that. You need that more than anyone. You need the power that is distinctly you. If you have muted that voice, you aren't going to make it. You aren't going to make it at all. And so I made make a real concerted effort to retrain them. Like they're like, do you think I should run today? I sprained my ankle, and I would turn it right back around on them. All right, tell me the factors involved in this decision. Tell me, like, how does it feel? Take a second, feel into your body. Tell me how it actually feels. Because where they've been trained to do is think about, they're already jumping ahead of all that. If I take today off, I'm going to miss the workout. And then if I miss the workout, I'm not going to be able to do the race, and they're trying to make the decision on whether or not to run on that Tuesday based on all that stuff. That's not even, none of that's going to actually get you to the Olympic trials or an Olympic team. You're going to end up on the bench injured.
And I think it's really important that coaches who are listening to this and say, yes, everything she says, that's how I want to coach. You made a really important point there. You made it very quickly. You're going to get athletes who come into your program, who come into your team, who have been coached the other way, without agency, without a voice, told to comply, learn the buzzwords to say and the things to do to make coach happy. And you're
Yep.
going to have to retrain them all as sort of human beings. And it doesn't come easily to people who have, it's like the puppy that's been beaten its whole
Yeah.
life is going to be very shy for a while.
Yeah. And even before they ever joined a team, especially if they're a girl, like you're such a good girl in their home growing up. You're such a good girl. You do what you're told, that kind of thing is like, it starts so young.
So much. I know we're
Well,
pretty much at the end
yeah,
of
and
time here.
we'll have to come back again because I wanted to get to the triad. We're not going to get to that,
We're
but
not going to get
that's
to
that's
that.
another whole thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's we
Yeah.
have so much.
Yeah.
We have so much. I
Well,
have
we
two
can do a part
pages.
two. I think we
Yeah,
should do
Yeah.
a part
We should
two.
do
absolutely.
part
Yeah,
two.
we
We
should
should
do a
do
part
part
two.
two.
Yeah.
Just on the to close part one, right? Number one, just any final thoughts from you, Lauren, on something you wish we asked or you wanted to share, and then of course, how do people connect with you? How do they get this book? I mean, it's already a New York Times bestseller. I remember it was sitting on the counter when I got a copy from your publishing house, And my wife came home and said, "Where did you get that? 3 people already recommended that book to me." And so, yeah, she just read it on the airplane back and forth from South America. So,
I'm really glad a lot of people are telling me that it hooks them and it's hard to put down. And so that to me is like the greatest compliment. I want people hooked emotionally so that the science and the data can come to life in a way that it can't in an academic paper or in a random news story, right? So
mhm.
I think that that is, and I am also really happy to be speaking to 2 men about this. And I feel like the the most powerful there's a lot of eye-opening happening with women too, or they're re-examining the story of their early days in sport or the story they've developed about themselves as people from those experiences. And they're like,
Mhm.
whoa, I see it all differently now. And for men, that they have a different awakening, but it's like, okay, I have a better idea of what it's like to walk through the world in a body that's different than my own with different forces, invisible forces. It's like you're going to get in the women's locker room, but you're even going to get a step farther. You're in the mind of a woman in the women's locker room because not even we're talking about this stuff in the women's locker room. And
Mhm.
then you can be a better ally, a better parent, a better uncle, a better teacher, a better medical professional when you have some of that demystified. And in the end, my friend Jessie Dale, she has this quote she likes to say. Her feminist quote is, "Well, you see, women are a lot like people." And then fills in the blank with whatever the thing is, like when it's like abortion rights. It's like, well, it turns out women are a lot like people. They like to have
Yeah.
autonomy over what happens to their body, or women are a lot
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
people, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's like a kind of a more lighthearted takeaway that I think is that this
L-
book can bring to life.
Love it. Where do
Wonderful.
people get the book and where do people connect with you?
And get the book anywhere books are sold, and like indie bookstores and Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it. It's getting great distribution right now, and it's really making me happy. Thank you.
Mhm. Mhm. And website, do you have a website? Do you still run your blog and everything like that?
Currently, my old website is just redirecting to a landing page for the book, but I'm going to be building that out more over time.
Okay.
So on the website, laurenfleshman.com, you can read some of the fantastic blurbs and reviews that I've received from people who've read the book and get an idea if it's something you'd be interested in if you're not convinced from this conversation.
Mhm.
We tried our best. Again, we had many authors on here, and I over the years, 5 years of this podcast now, I've read a lot of books for it, and this is one of the top books. Really good, and it kind of unexpected because I didn't think it would be a topic for me, and it was. And so,
Mm.
congratulations, you really did a phenomenal job.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jerry. I
Yep,
appreciate
you
it.
bet. You bet.
Awesome, Lauren. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Go ahead, John. Take it, John.
Jerry, that was pretty awesome, huh?
Yeah, stimulating. Like I need to go out for a run right now to sort of decompress after all of that. She very high energy. Uh, we have a lot of authors on here, and it's hard to find someone who writes books who you can draw the comparison between who they are as people. So many times you're saying one thing, but you're being another. And there's definitely, I got the sense, John, did you, that whatever she's writing here, like that's really who she is. She's
Well,
really, a person who'll kick you in the balls if to get what you need. Yeah. I
I
mean,
think
in a good way, a good way.
Ernest Hemingway said you can't write until you've lived life, right? And what's
Hmm.
awesome about this book is she's lived this as an athlete and
Hmm.
then is very thoughtful about it and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
started writing about it on
Hmm.
her blog.
Yeah,
And as she did that, she started getting lots of questions that kept coming up from people about injuries, about health,
yeah.
nutrition, all this. We didn't even talk about her and her husband, Jesse, started a company called Picky Bars out of their kitchen that
I
they
know,
eventually
I
sold
know,
for $10 million
I
to
know.
Laird Superfoods. I eat Picky Bars oatmeal all the time. Their performance oatmeal. And, so, and I've never met either of them, but she lived this life, this great writer. And then she went back and said, I want to tell this story, but I'm going to bring all the science into it. And and
Hmm.
and then what I think she also has done, which we talked about at the end, was, she said, you know what, I can't just talk about how to do it right. Let me build a women's professional running team and do it right.
Yeah.
and give athletes agency.
Yeah.
And help them understand themselves and all these things that they think are weaknesses or whatever that society has told them is wrong with them, is that there's nothing wrong, and here's the path. And so yeah, it's really, really an amazing book. And you don't have to be, it's not a running book. It's a book about running that's not about running.
Well, it's using running as a vehicle to transport us to places that we all need to go.
Yeah.
It's like a bus, we're getting on the bus with her. And the running metaphor, you don't have to be a runner to relate to the pain, to the fear, to the love, all of those ideas. There's a lot of fear in that book. And there's a lot of fear in our lives. There's a lot of love in that book, and there's a lot of love in our lives. And so in a sense, we are much more, like she said, the same than we're different. And she brings that out. There's a human factor in that book that all of us relate and resonate with. One of the last things she said, John, was really what's going to stick with me for a while. And that is, and this is important for coaches, and I guess parents as well, which is the power of being you. So many coaches, we're doing a coaching conference. They'll say to me, Jerry, so help me become more like Steve Kerr. And I say, I can't do that. I said, I can help you become more like you. And maybe you can adapt some of the strategies that these great coaches are using. But I think we all need to know is that we shine when we are who we are. Like she wrote this book, everything she says in there, that's her. You saw that there. It was her. She was very bright, eloquent, strong, respectful, thoughtful, all of those things. That's who she is. And the book brings that out. It's not always the case that an author is like that. But I think as coaches and parents, if you're wondering how to do it, you've got to be yourself and pick up the strategies and use the strategies by being you. And that's the whole idea of agency. And when we're being compliant and spending a lot of energy on being compliant, we're not being ourselves, being what other people are telling us we should be. And that's where the mistake happened with her. And when she got up on that track and she went home, that was the end of it. That was her liberation. That was the aha moment. And it all comes together.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. There's this quote about the book, the description: written with heart and verve, Good for a Girl is a joyful love letter to the running life, a raw personal narrative of growth and change, and a vital call to reimagine sports for young women. That's what the book's about. I couldn't say it.
That sums it up.
Couldn't say it better than that. And so thanks to Lauren Fleshman. Again, you can check it out. LaurenFleshman.com is her website. The book is Good for a Girl, a woman running in a man's world. It's a fantastic book. Thank you all for listening today. Go out, grab this book. You'll be a better coach, better parent, better person for it. And you'll better understand more than 50% of the population. I know I do. That's it. We'll sign off here for today. Just final reminder, we're registering people for Way of Champions Conference. We announced last week that Phil Jackson is going to be joining us. 11-time NBA champion coach is going to record a little session for us. We're so excited to have Phil on board. So if you're not registered yet, go to just changethegameproject.com, click on Way of Champions Conference on the main menu, go to Jerry's website, click on it, get signed up, get registered, get your hotel booked, because it's going to be a doozy of an event, isn't it, sir?
I like that word.
Doozy it is. All right, everyone, remember, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, change the world, make it a better place this week. We'll see you again next week.